battle between good and evil. That's what I think is going on in the Gaza war right now, after Hamas attacked Israel, killed 1,200 people and took 250 people hostage. The extraordinary backlash on Israel for rescuing 4 hostages I find absolutely shocking. But what we've seen in developments in that region over the last 24 hours is a United Nations Security Council vote to support a US proposed Israel-Gaza ceasefire plan. The proposal sets out conditions for a full and complete ceasefire, release of all hostages by Hamas, the return of dead hostages remains and the exchange of Palestinian prisoners. 14 of the 15 Security Council members voted in favour of the resolution drafted by the US. Russia abstained, as they always do on these sorts of matters. The resolution states that Israel has accepted the ceasefire proposal and now it's up to Hamas to agree to it too. Yeah, you don't hear the usual suspects go, why aren't Hamas agreeing to this, eh? Let's talk about this with Andrew Fox. He's a defence, Middle East and disinformation expert, delighted to say, joins us again. Good afternoon to you, Andrew.
Hi, Julia.
Thanks for joining us. It is extraordinary. We're constantly told, why won't Israel agree to a ceasefire? Well, apparently Israel have agreed to a ceasefire. They've agreed to these terms. Hamas haven't. They've said they welcomed this vote in the Security Council, but is this about actually delivering peace or is this about something else?
You've got an enormous amount of juggling going on here. So Mr. Biden wants to be seen as a peacemaker so that he can hopefully win back some of the votes that he's lost in key swing states. You know, look at Wisconsin. He only won it by 21,000 in the last election. 1 in 5 Democratic voters in Wisconsin are now saying that they will change their votes based on what's happening in Gaza. So that could potentially swing the presidential election against Mr. Biden. So he's really keen to push this through. Mr. Netanyahu has to keep the Americans on side. They get billions in aid from America. That can't be switched off. So to a certain extent, he has to come to heel. And this has been presented actually as an Israeli ceasefire proposal.
Yes, and Biden first announces on the day that Donald Trump was convicted of those felony charges, and we all thought Biden was going to make a statement about something else, and suddenly he came out with this announcement, this Israeli policy and ceasefire plan, which Israel have been remarkably silent about.
Yeah, quite so. And, you know, it's a terrible deal for Israel. It's a dreadful deal.
Why?
If this plan goes ahead, you will have Hamas still in power in Gaza. Yes, the hostages will have been returned, which is clearly very important, particularly domestically in Israel. And sorry, students being noisy outside my door. The fact that Hamas remain in power means this entire war has been a failure for Israel. It is a strategic disaster if Hamas remain in power in Gaza, and that's what this ceasefire appeal.
And that's the thing. Like this would be perfect for Hamas. Now we're constantly told, oh, the Hamas had promised they promised to return. I mean, genuinely, people tweeting me yesterday. Hamas said they'd return all the hostages the day after October the 7th in return for Israel not invading. It's like, yeah, right, because that would have happened. Why would they have taken the hostages in the first place? They took them as a negotiating tool. That was their purpose. They've also said they would commit October the 7th every day if they had the opportunity, if they were left in power. And this is where you've got the West, you know, bleeding heart politicians and media tying the hands of Israel, saying, you know, you can't go into Rafah, you can't do this, you can't do that, and chastising them from everything. Were you, I mean, you're a former major in the parachute regiment, were you as, I mean, shocked and appalled as I was at some of the international reaction to that hostage rescue that took place in Gaza over the weekend, or just before the weekend, where we saw 4 hostages brought out safely? Yes, there were people, Palestinians, who were killed, and yes, they will have included women and children, and yes, there would have been civilians involved. But claims from Hamas that it was over 200 who were killed. I mean, we have no way of verifying that. But surely rescuing your hostages using your military might is the job of a country, isn't it?
Yes, absolutely. And I think we're at British hostages. We would absolutely equally expect the SAS to be kicking indoors and taking names. And, you know, the hostage rescue is one thing. The casualty figures are a completely different thing. You know, they were announcing 200 dead before the last helicopter wheels were up from that hostage rescue.
Wait a minute. Are you saying that a terrorist organisation that has brutally murdered and raped and tortured people and taken hostages, are you telling me that they might have lied, Andrew?
I know it's hard to believe. It's a really challenging concept to get your head around, but it's distinctly possible that Hamas aren't entirely truthful. You know, as most psychopathic genocidal terror groups are not. But the reason there were casualties is because one of the vehicles extracting the hostages broke down, and Hamas were launching a counterattack of hundreds of fighters at those hostages stranded. and the Israelis replied with Apache Hellfire missiles and potentially fast jet airstrikes. So
Yeah.
once again, as with every single civilian casualty in Gaza, the blame lies squarely at the feet of Hamas. If they hadn't taken hostages, if they weren't trying to kill people rescuing the hostages, civilians wouldn't have been placed in harm's way. Israel were doing nothing more or less than you would expect any country to do in the same situation, and it's Hamas who have made
Yeah.
civilians
And
be.
again, these hostages were being held in a civilian home. Certainly, one of the hostages, Noah Agamani, she was being held in the home of a doctor and of a journalist who's done lots of work for Al Jazeera. Civilians, we're told, and yet they were holding a hostage where she was kept effectively as a slave in the darkness, not allowed to speak, just working as a dog's body for them, for 8 long months. I mean, it is extraordinary that people are still talking about these being civilian deaths. Now, look, there's no doubt at all there'll be families, civilians who get caught up in this, and children certainly can't, young children who have been killed cannot hold any responsibility. But it is Hamas that have chosen to do this, Hamas that have chosen to hide amongst the civilian population, which in itself is a war crime, is it not? And yet we never see Hamas chastised for that.
Yes, absolutely. And if you look at comparable conflicts as well, look at the Syrian civil war. Even if we take Hamas's figure of 37,000, this has been going on for 9 months. In Syria, they killed that many people in 27 days. They're currently up to 600,000 dead in Syria, and yet not a peep from the international media. It's very much an anti-Israeli issue rather than it is
and
a
Sudan again,
legitimate moral outrage.
ongoing in Sudan right now. Deaths in Sudan absolutely dwarf anything that's happening in Gaza, and yet the focus is all on what happens in Gaza. And again, it's because it's Israel. Israel is the dog to beat constantly on this. In terms of the ceasefire, actually going ahead, do you think there will be an agreement on a ceasefire? Will we get that?
Well, it's not in Hamas's interest to say yes right now for the simple reason that their entire strategy is designed around delegitimizing Israel on the
Yeah.
world stage, and that's having a huge success. And we can't
Oh
deny it.
yeah.
Israel's been blown away in the information space.
Well, in the lies war.
Yeah, exactly so. In the disinformation that's been flowing about Israel, they've been almost unable to counter it in any way, shape, or form.
Yeah.
And so it's in Hamas's interest to drag this out, but it's
Right.
also in Hamas's interest to agree to the deal in due course because it's a great deal for them and a terrible deal for Israel.
Really good to talk to you, Andrew Fox, Defence Middle East and Disinformation expert. Thank you very much.